Hello everyone and welcome back to Dr. Creepy. In tonight's video, we dive into 8 most disturbing true Ohio small-town horror stories. Chilling encounters hidden in quiet neighborhoods, forgotten roads, and rural towns where the nights feel too still and the shadows linger a little too long. From figures standing beneath flickering streetlights, to footsteps moving across empty porches, to whispers echoing out of basements no one has entered in decades, these stories reveal the darker side of towns that seem peaceful during the day, but change the moment the sun goes down. Strange silhouettes appearing at the edge of yards, windows that light up even though the houses are abandoned, roads that feel like they're watching you as you pass through, and visitors who don't knock, don't speak, and don't leave when you tell them to. Each account uncovers the eerie secrets hidden in Ohio's smallest communities. If you're new here, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new true horror stories. Now get comfortable, turn down the lights, and let's begin. I grew up in Northwest Ohio, where most winters feel like somebody froze the world and forgot to start it again. Long stretches of road cut through cornfields that sleep under thick layers of ice, and the sky hangs so low it feels like it's pressing on your shoulders. It's the kind of place where you can drive for miles without seeing another set of headlights, and on some nights, that silence feels like it's watching you. I was coming home from a late shift at the factory the first time I saw something moving in the frozen cornfield. It was early January, well after midnight, and the temperature had dropped to the kind of cold that makes the air taste metallic. I kept the heater on full blast, and even then, my breath fogged the windshield every time I exhaled. Most of the cornfields around Fostoria are just stubble by winter, broken stalks poking through frost like a cemetery of brittle bones. They don't rustle, they don't sway, they just sit there, stiff and silent, waiting for spring. That night, though, something was moving between them. At first, I assumed it was some kind of animal. Deer still wander around during winter, even when the cold is brutal. But as I approached the next bend in the road, my headlights pulled in just enough of the field to show a shape pacing between the rows. It wasn't on 4 legs. It wasn't shaped like a deer. It walked upright, long and thin, its movements stiff like it was learning how to control its body. The figure moved parallel to the road, keeping the same pace as my car as I slowed down. Its head snapped toward me, a sudden twitchy motion, and its shoulders hitched upward as if it inhaled hard. I couldn't see its face, not clearly, but something about the way it tilted its head felt wrong, curious but in an almost hungry way. I sped up, telling myself I was tired and seeing things. When I checked the rearview mirror, the field looked empty, just rows of frost, silent and undisturbed. The next night it was there again. This time it was standing still, perfectly still, as if waiting. I only caught a quick glimpse as I passed, a tall, narrow shape halfway submerged between the frozen stalks. It almost blended in, except for the silhouette. It faced the road, it faced me. I didn't look again. I told myself it had to be a leftover scarecrow someone forgot to take down. But scarecrows don't move positions every night. Scarecrows don't walk, and scarecrows don't follow the pace of cars. By the 3rd night, I started dreading the drive home. I considered taking the long way through town, but that road was the most direct route, and I convinced myself that avoiding it would mean admitting I was afraid. I didn't want to give it that satisfaction, whatever it was. Around 12:40 a.m., I reached the same stretch of road. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the fields looked darker than usual. My headlights cut through the first row of frozen stalks and caught the figure again, closer than before. It was standing almost at the edge of the ditch this time, half a step from the shoulder. The shape was clearer now. Its limbs were too long, its torso too short, like someone stretched it in the wrong places. Its skin looked pale, almost gray, and its head hung forward like the weight of it was too much for its neck. This time it turned fully toward me. Its face wasn't right. It had features, eyes, a mouth, but the proportions were off. The eyes seemed sunken too deep. The mouth stretched too wide, like the skin around it had been pulled back. I didn't slow down. I didn't look again. I pressed the accelerator and didn't let off until I reached my street. When I got inside my house, I double-checked the doors. I told myself it was just caution because of the late hour, but deep down, something had shifted. I couldn't get the image of that face out of my mind. I barely slept. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore it. I started covering the passenger side window with my hand when I drove by, pretending to change the radio or adjust the heat. I didn't want to see it again. But even when I didn't look directly at the field, I knew it was out there. It was the way the hair on the back of my neck lifted every time I drove through that stretch, the way my pulse spiked, the way the air in the car felt heavier, like something unseen was leaning close. On the 6th night, everything changed. I left work earlier than usual, hoping that getting home before midnight would somehow break the pattern. It didn't. As I neared the bend, I braced myself. I didn't want to look, but my eyes drifted toward the right anyway. The figure was so close to the road it was almost standing on it. It wasn't moving this time. It was waiting. Its head rose slowly, tracking my car as I approached. I felt something inside me twist, a primal instinct screaming at me to keep driving. Its shoulders rolled back, stretching, and its limbs seemed longer than before. Taller. As my headlights swept across it, the thing stepped forward, one long leg extending unnaturally far, like it was about to cross the road. Its mouth twitched, opened. The skin around its jaw cracked as if frozen. I didn't think. I slammed the gas pedal down so hard my tires skidded on ice. The car fishtailed, but I straightened it and tore down the road, heart hammering, breath shaking. I didn't look back. I refused to. When I reached home, I turned every lock again, closed every curtain. Something had changed in that moment when it stepped forward. It wasn't watching anymore. It was approaching. The next morning, I found footprints in the snow next to my house. At first, I thought they were normal tracks, maybe from a neighbor or a stray dog. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. They were long, impossibly long, each step nearly 3 feet apart, and the shape, nothing human had feet like that. They weren't hooves or paws. They were flat, with elongated toes that dug deep into the ice like claws. They led from the tree line behind my house straight toward my bedroom window, and then back again. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lights off, sitting in the living room, listening. The house creaked occasionally, as old houses do, but every sound made me jump. The heater clicked, the pipes hummed. My nerves were stretched so thin that even my own heartbeat sounded too loud. Around 3 a.m., the knocking started. It wasn't loud. It was slow, deliberate, tapping on the siding just below my bedroom window, exactly where the tracks had led. 3 knocks, then silence, then 2 more, followed by the unmistakable sound of something dragging along the wall, scraping lightly against the wood. I froze. Then came the softest sound, almost hidden under the wind. A breath, a long, shaky exhale that fogged the glass. I didn't see it, but I heard it. Another breath, and then a low, almost curious hum. When it finally stopped, I didn't move until morning light crept into the room. The next night was worse. I stayed awake again, refusing to let sleep make me vulnerable. Around the same time, 3 a.m., the knocking returned. But this time it wasn't testing the window. It moved. Around the corner of the house, down the wall, toward the back door. 3 knocks, slow, heavy. I grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the kitchen. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold it steady. The back door's small window was frosted over, but something dark shifted on the other side. A silhouette taller than the doorframe. Another breath. This one louder, closer. I backed away and locked myself in the bathroom, sitting on the floor with the flashlight aimed at the door until dawn. I didn't go to work the next day. I couldn't. I couldn't even bring myself to stand near a window. Every shadow felt wrong. Every sound felt personal, like it wasn't just wandering, it was searching. That evening, I decided I had 2 choices: stay and lose my mind, or leave and hope it didn't follow. I packed what I could and left before dark. I didn't take the main road. I avoided the fields entirely. I spent the night in a motel 2 towns over and tried to convince myself it couldn't track me. That whatever it was, it belonged to that stretch of frozen cornfield. But I woke to footprints outside the motel window. In fresh snow, long steps, deep impressions, and a smear of frost left behind on the glass where something tall had breathed against it. I drove straight to my sister's house in Cleveland, thinking that maybe a big city would overwhelm it, confuse it, or keep it away. Noise, lights, people. everything the countryside didn't have. That night, for the first time in a week, I slept, but not peacefully. I woke up gasping, not because of a noise, but because the room felt wrong. The air was cold, too cold. When I exhaled, I saw my breath. My sister's house was warm. There was no reason the room should be freezing. Then I heard it, a soft dragging sound across the carpet. I forced myself to look toward the doorway. A shape was standing just beyond the hall light, its limbs bent low, its long fingers touching the floor. It had found me, even here. It stretched its head sideways, eyes wide and glassy, reflecting the dim light like an animal. Its mouth twitched, opening just slightly, and I realized the sound I heard wasn't breathing. It was laughing, very quietly. A dry, broken sound, like someone trying to remember how to imitate a laugh they'd never used before. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I couldn't. It leaned in closer to the doorway, its neck extending too far, bending at an angle no neck should bend. Its eyes darted across the room, locking onto mine. I felt my whole body sink, like the bed had become water. The air thickened. The world outside the doorway darkened. The last thing I remember from that night is its hand sliding across the floor toward me, long fingers stretching further, joints popping softly like cracking ice. I must have passed out. When I came to, daylight filled the room. My sister was shaking me, terrified, asking why the room felt like a freezer, asking why the carpet by the doorway was wet, asking why the window had a handprint on it, a long distorted smear of frost that didn't match any human hand. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because there was something else on the floor, a scrap of frozen corn husk, fresh, as if it had fallen from something's hand when it leaned over me. I've been running ever since, town to town, state to state, never staying more than a week. But winter follows. Frost appears on windows even in warm places. Footsteps show up behind motels, and every few nights I hear quiet tapping wherever I sleep. 3 knocks, 2 knocks, silence, a breath, and then that soft, broken laugh. Whatever walks the frozen cornfields of Ohio learned the shape of my fear, and it's never going to stop following me. I didn't grow up believing in ghosts or curses or anything supernatural. I'm an Ohio kid through and through, born in Circleville, raised near pumpkin show crowds and endless farmland, used to hearing weird stories passed around by bored teenagers. Most of them were harmless, most of them were exaggerated, and most of them didn't matter to anyone once the sun came up. But the story about the old grain silo on the outskirts of town was different. People didn't whisper that one for fun. They told it like a warning, like a reminder. There had been an accident in the 90s, 2 workers trapped inside during a collapse. The silo had partially imploded, creating a kind of internal landslide that buried them alive. They weren't recovered for 3 days. My dad told me the town shut down the feed company after that. Too much liability, too much grief. The silo stayed there though, tall, rusted, abandoned. Locals said you could still hear something coming from inside some nights. Screams, scraping, crying, depending on who you asked. I never believed any of it. When you grow up around cornfields and quiet backroads, you learn how much the mind invents when it's bored or scared. I believed that. Right up until the night my friend Chase dragged me out there. We were both 17, stupid, and eager to prove something to each other. Chase had this way of turning everything into a dare. And when he heard that some kids had claimed to hear noises near the silo a few nights earlier, he decided we needed to be the ones to solve the mystery. "It's just wind," he said as we jumped the chain-link fence around the property. Or animals. People hear one weird sound and suddenly they're convinced it's ghosts. I didn't disagree, but the moment my boots hit the frozen dirt inside the fence, something in me tightened. It was colder there, sharper somehow. The kind of cold that felt aware of you. The silo towered above us like a broken rib bone stabbing up from the earth. Its metal siding was dented, brown with rust, streaked from decades of storms. Most of the lower openings had been welded shut long ago. Only one remained, a narrow service door someone had pried open. It gaped just enough for a person to slip inside sideways. The wind whistled through the cracks, creating a thin, high pitch that set my teeth on edge. "Come on," Chase said, "at least peek inside." I wanted to tell him no. Everything about the place felt wrong. The way the snow hadn't settled near the walls, The way animal tracks stopped a few feet from the base, like the wildlife refused to go closer. The way the air tasted metallic, even though there was no reason for it. But I didn't want to be the coward, so I followed him. As we approached the door, the wind died. Completely. The silence felt artificial, like someone holding their breath. "I don't like this," I whispered. Chase smirked. "That's the point." He clicked on his flashlight and wedged himself through the gap in the door. I hesitated, taking one last look at the empty property around us. The fields were dark. The road beyond them was empty. No houses, no passing cars, just the silo and the cold. I slipped in behind him. The interior hit me like a wall. The air was warmer than outside, but thick, damp, almost humid. It smelled like decaying grain and metal. The flashlight beam cut across the open space and showed us the collapsed pile of old corn and dust in the center, sloping upward toward the interior walls. Shadows clung to the curved metal like stains. Chase kicked at a chunk of hardened corn. "It's just old feed, nothing spooky here." But the deeper we moved, the heavier the air felt. I noticed my breathing sounded too loud. Our footsteps echoed in a strange, delayed way, like the silo swallowed some sounds and amplified others. Chase wandered ahead, shining his light on the walls. "You hear that?" he asked suddenly. I froze. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, something brushed against the metal siding from the outside. A soft scrape, like fingertips trailing across a wall. "Probably a branch," I said, though there were no trees anywhere near the structure. Chase moved toward a ladder that had once led to the upper catwalk. Most of the rungs were rusted through. "We should go up," he said. "No." I replied immediately. "We shouldn't even be in here," he laughed. "Relax." Before I could stop him, he grabbed the lowest intact rung and tested his weight. It creaked but held. He started climbing. A tapping sound erupted above us. Not fast, not random, slow, rhythmic, tap, 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 like someone knocking from the inside of the metal roof. My chest tightened. "Chase, get down." He paused and looked back at me. "Dude, it's just..." Something answered. Not a knock, a voice. Muffled, distant, but unmistakable. "Help." Chase froze halfway up the ladder. I could barely breathe. "Chase, come down." He didn't move. He was looking up toward the dark top of the silo, where the roof curved inward in thick shadows. The voice came again, louder this time, clearer. "Help me." It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal, and it wasn't a recording or some prank. It sounded human, but wrong, like the voice was being pulled through layers of dirt. Chase climbed faster. "Chase, stop!" But he didn't. He reached the half-collapsed catwalk, grabbed the railing, and pulled himself onto the metal grate. The tapping intensified. Louder, faster, coming from everywhere above us at once. I backed toward the door. "Chase, seriously, I'm leaving." He didn't answer. I shined my flashlight up at the catwalk. He was staring toward the far end, unmoving. "Chase?" My voice cracked. Then he screamed. Not a startled shout, not a yelp, a full, gut-ripping scream that bounced off the silo walls like a trapped animal's last cry. I ran toward the ladder but stopped when something shifted above him. Something large. The catwalk shuddered. A shape moved in the dark, too fast for my brain to register. The metal groaned and a section of the walkway gave way. Chase fell. He hit the pile of old grain hard, sending up a cloud of dust. I sprinted to him, coughing, eyes burning. He was curled on his side, gasping, clutching his shoulder. "We need to go," I said, grabbing him, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking up at the opening where the catwalk had broken, eyes wide with terror. "It's in the walls," he whispered. A scratching sound erupted all around us. Not outside this time, inside, under the layers of old feed, inside the metal, inside the structure, hundreds of tiny scraping noises. Fast, desperate. "Stop," Chase whispered. "Please stop." The walls trembled. Something pushed outward from behind the metal. The siding bulged between the bolts, like fingers pressing through fabric. Long indentations ran up the height of the silo, as if something enormous was climbing inside the walls. "Help me!" The voice pressed through the metal again. But it wasn't just one voice anymore. Dozens joined it. "Help! Help! Help!" All of them overlapping, distorted, blending into a chorus of buried agony. I yanked Chase to his feet and dragged him toward the door. He stumbled beside me, limping, crying out every time his injured shoulder moved. We were 15 feet from the exit when the grain behind us shifted. Then it began to rise. A mound of old corn and dust lifted upward like something beneath it was pushing through. The surface rippled, a crack opened through the center. Something pale slid out, a hand, long fingers, nails broken to jagged points, skin gray and stretched thin over bone. Another hand appeared beside it, then a face, not a whole one, just half, one eye missing, the other bulging and shattered, a mouth hanging open, jaw dislocated, teeth broken, grain poured from its throat as it tried to speak. "Help!" I screamed and pulled Chase harder. The mound burst open completely, arms, faces, twisted bodies entangled together like a mass grave trying to climb out of itself. Some were whole, some were just remnants. Others looked like they had been crushed flat and reformed wrongly. They clawed upward, reaching, moaning, sobbing, voices merging in a sick chorus. "Help me, please. Don't leave. Don't leave us." Chase tripped near the door. I hauled him up, tears streaming down my face, throat burning from dust and panic. We squeezed through the narrow opening, ripping our jackets on the metal. As soon as we stumbled outside, the screaming inside the silo intensified, building to a piercing wail that made my ears ring. The metal vibrated violently, dents pushed outward from dozens of places at once. Then the voice changed. The cries blended into one deep, resonant moan, a single word: "Stay." The ground trembled. Snow slid down the sides of the silo. Something massive slammed into the interior wall, making the whole structure tilt. "Run!" I shouted. We sprinted across the frozen dirt. Behind us, the silo groaned like it was tearing apart from the inside. We reached the fence as a deafening metallic shriek split the air. I turned in time to see the silo convulse, the walls buckling outward as if something huge inside had slammed into them with full force. Then it stopped. Silence fell like a blanket. Not wind, not movement, nothing. Chase collapsed to his knees, sobbing. "We have to tell someone," he choked. But what could we say? That the dead were alive inside a forgotten farm structure. That the missing workers had become part of something impossible, something still moving? That wasn't going to help us. And deep down, neither of us wanted to risk going back with anyone else. We climbed the fence, limped to my car, and drove away without speaking. For weeks, Chase wouldn't answer my texts, wouldn't go to school, wouldn't leave his house. When he finally did show up again, he was thinner, jumpy. Eyes sunken from lack of sleep. He pulled me aside one morning. "It's not done," he whispered. "What's not?" Their voices. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard. "I hear them, at night, in my walls." I didn't believe him, until 2 weeks later when I started hearing them too. Not loud, not clear, but unmistakable. Faint scraping from the vents, soft tapping on the siding, and every few nights when the house was stillest, a voice whispering through the floorboards in a grainy, broken tone. "Help me. I haven't slept right since. Neither has Chase." 2 days ago, he texted me at 4 in the morning. They're closer. Yesterday, he didn't show up for school again. His parents said they hadn't seen him since the night before. The police found his boots outside near the tree line, half buried in scraped up snow. They found no footprints leading away, no sign of struggle, just a faint trail of corn dust leading toward the woods. I know what took him, and I can feel it trying to take me too. Because last night, for the first time, the voice didn't come from the walls. It came from the corner of my bedroom, where the moonlight doesn't reach. Stay. I still think about that night every time snow starts falling. People like to romanticize blizzards, soft flakes, quiet streets, the world going still. But in small-town Ohio, a snowstorm can turn your house into an island. Roads vanish, phone lines die. The dark presses against your windows until it feels like an ocean waiting to swallow everything when the lights go out. That's why when the storm hit Waverly the week before Christmas, we didn't question the sudden isolation. It was normal. We'd been through it every winter. The wind was so loud it sounded like a freight train rushing past nonstop. Snow piled against the front door until it couldn't open more than a few inches. The power flickered every few hours, and the temperature inside slowly dropped no matter how high we set the heat. But the real problem, the truth behind what happened, didn't start with the blizzard. It started with the knocking. It was about 11 at night when my dad first heard it. 3 slow knocks on the back door, gentle but deliberate, spaced far enough apart that they didn't seem random. He muted the TV and looked at me. "You hear that?" I did. But I also knew nobody would be walking through 2 feet of snow to reach our house this late, especially not during the worst storm we'd had in years. Mom came into the living room, wrapped in a blanket. "Someone's at the door?" Dad frowned. "Probably tree limbs. The wind's throwing things around." Another knock echoed across the kitchen walls. This time it wasn't gentle. My dog, Coda, ran to the sliding glass door with his tail tucked so tight under his belly it nearly disappeared. He didn't bark, he whimpered. Dad got up to check, but I followed him. The house felt wrong, colder, heavier, like the pressure dropped inside instead of outside. He wiped away the condensation on the glass with his sleeve and peered through the fogged pane. I stood behind him, forcing myself not to breathe so I could hear everything. We were both waiting for a shadow or a face or any sign of someone outside, but there was nothing. No footprints in the snow except our own that now sat buried under a new layer. No shapes near the porch. No movement at all. Dad cursed under his breath. Wind blew something into the door. Happens. But Coda kept staring through the glass. His ears were up, but he wasn't growling. He was shaking. Mom called from the hallway. "Everything okay?" Dad hesitated before answering. "Yeah, just the storm." I could tell he didn't believe that. Neither did I. Around midnight, the power went out. The house dimmed until only pale moonlight glowed through the storm-thick windows. Mom lit a few candles, but the flames shivered violently from the drafts blowing under the doors. The temperature kept dropping. The walls popped from the cold. The wind was so loud outside that sometimes it sounded like voices, long cries swallowed by distance. But the knocking returned. This time, it came from the front door. 3 knocks, slow, measured, almost polite. Dad grabbed the flashlight and pointed it at the peephole. "Don't," Mom whispered. "Just leave it." He looked anyway. There's no one. The knocking repeated, harder this time. The wood groaned. Snow slid from the roof. Something pressed against the bottom of the door from the outside, making the rubber lining bulge inward. Dad backed away. The knocking moved again, to the side door near the laundry room, then to the basement door leading to the backyard patio. 3 knocks at each location, always in perfect rhythm. Then silence. Coda hid under the dining table. We gathered in the living room, all close enough that nobody felt alone. The temperature dipped another few degrees. Our breaths turned into soft clouds. The candles flickered from unseen drafts. Something in the house creaked that wasn't the walls settling. It was too slow, too heavy. Mom whispered, "It's circling." I wished she hadn't said it out loud. The truth always becomes sharper when spoken. The storm outside raged on, but inside felt worse. Like the house wasn't protecting us anymore. Like the storm wasn't our biggest danger. At one point, Dad went to the garage to get the emergency heater. I followed him because something in me refused to let anyone be alone. The garage was colder than the rest of the house, and it smelled different. Sharp, metallic, almost like wet iron. Dad rummaged for the heater while I stood near the inside door, trying to calm my breathing. Then I heard something scrape across the outside of the garage door. A long, dragging sound, not the wind, not ice, something moving. Then a faint sound, a voice, a man's voice. Cold. My skin crawled. Dad froze, heater still in his hands. Another dragging sound, something sliding across the door, slowly, purposefully. Then the whisper again, but closer. "Cold, please." Dad left the heater behind and shut the garage door so fast the frame rattled. He locked it even though it wasn't an outside entrance. "What was that?" I whispered. He shook his head. "Just wind." He wasn't lying to me. He was lying to himself. When we returned to the living room, the knocking resumed, this time on all 3 doors at once. The rhythm didn't change. The force didn't change. Like 3 separate people were knocking in perfect synchronization. Dad grabbed the fire poker and moved us all toward the hallway. Nobody answer. Nobody go near the windows. The knock stopped. Then something started brushing against the siding of the house, moving slowly around the perimeter. It wasn't footsteps, it was softer than that. Like clothing dragging, or skin. The house felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were bending inward. Then the voice returned, not a whisper this time, a clear, gentle knock on the sliding door, followed by, "Let me in, it's cold." It was the same voice I'd heard outside the garage, but now it was copying my father's tone, his cadence. If I hadn't been standing next to Dad, I would have thought it was him outside. Mom covered her mouth. "Oh God." Dad held the poker tighter. He was shaking now too. The voice leaned closer to the glass. We could hear the faintest breath fogging the pane. "I'm freezing, please." Then another voice spoke at the back door. A woman's voice. "Please let me in, it's so cold." Then another at the front door, a child's voice. "Let me in, let me in, I'm cold." Three voices, three doors, one phrase. Mom whispered a prayer. Dad mouthed something I didn't catch. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Then the voices began speaking to each other, still outside but circling the house as if walking in a slow, coordinated loop. "I'm cold. Let me in. So cold, so cold. Let us in." Soft, persistent, surrounding us. We didn't sleep. We couldn't. The voices went on for hours, sometimes whispering, sometimes tapping, sometimes dragging against the siding, but never leaving. At around 4 in the morning, the storm began to ease. The wind quieted, the house warmed slightly, the voices faded, the knocking stopped. Mom checked the clock. "It's almost morning." Dad exhaled shakily. "We're okay. We made it." For the first time in hours, we believed him. Then Coda growled, a deep guttural sound I had never heard from him in his entire life. His fur stood straight up. He was staring at the hallway leading to the bedrooms. I followed his gaze and saw something that made my stomach drop so fast I almost collapsed. Footprints, wet footprints, leading from the back door into the hallway. We hadn't opened any doors that night. Mom's voice cracked, "Someone's inside." Dad whispered to me, "Get behind me." He lifted the fire poker and stepped toward the footprints. They were long, narrow, with heel marks but almost no ball of the foot, like the person walked strangely with weight placed on their heels. They led toward my bedroom. Dad walked slowly, every step deliberate. Mom stayed behind us, arms around Coda as he growled deeper, louder. The footprints glistened in the dim morning light like they'd been made minutes ago. Dad reached my bedroom door and nudged it open with the poker. The room was empty, but the window was open. Snow had drifted inside, covering the carpet. The curtains fluttered gently even though the air outside was still. And on the inside of the glass, near the latch, was something frozen into a thin, perfect shape. A handprint. Not large, but not fully human either. The fingers were too long, the palm too narrow. The shape slightly distorted like the hand pressing it had been stiff with cold. Dad closed the window, latched it, and stepped back. Nobody said a word. The footprints ended in my bedroom. No exit prints, no continuation. Nothing but the handprint to show anything had been there. We gathered in the kitchen and waited in silence for sunrise. The house creaked. Snow slid from the roof, but no more voices came. When the sun finally broke through the storm clouds, we went outside to check for tracks. There were none, not near any of the doors, not beneath my window, not anywhere around the house. Just smooth, untouched snow stretching across the yard like a blank sheet. The police said it was probably a tree branch, or our imagination, or animals, or stress from the storm. Everyone who didn't live through that night had an explanation. But none of them can explain the footprints inside. None of them can explain the voices. None of them can explain why the handprint on my bedroom window never fully thawed, not even when the temperature rose. It stayed there until we replaced the entire pane. And sometimes when I walk past that room late at night, I swear I hear knocking in the walls. 3 slow taps, followed by a whisper that sounds just like my father's voice. "Let me in." I used to think the scariest thing about being a police officer was making traffic stops at night, or walking into domestic calls without knowing who was waiting behind the door, or approaching a car that had been sitting on the shoulder with no hazard lights, engine off, windows fogged. But that was before I worked the late shift in Marietta, before the bridge. Marietta is a river town, quiet, old, and charming during the day, but different at night. The Ohio River absorbs sound, reflects light in strange ways, and gives the fog a mind of its own. Some parts of town feel older than the buildings themselves, like the ground remembers things people forgot. The old iron bridge on County Route 9 was one of those places. It wasn't used much anymore. A newer, safer concrete bridge had been built a mile downstream, leaving the old one as a shortcut for locals and a hangout spot for bored teenagers. The county planned to tear it down eventually, but budget cuts kept pushing the demolition back. Before all of this happened, the worst I ever dealt with there was graffiti or teenagers smoking things they shouldn't. But 3 months ago, dispatch started getting calls around 2 a.m. every few nights. Not 1:50, not 2:10, always within a minute of 2:13 a.m. People reported a long shadow crossing the bridge, not a person. A shadow, always walking from the far end toward the town side, always the same direction. The callers said it didn't move like a normal human shape, that it stretched unnaturally, that it moved faster than someone should be able to walk, but slower than running, like it glided. I didn't believe any of them, not at first. People call the police for strange things when they're tired or scared or staring into fog. I chalked it up to late-night imagination, tricks of light from passing barges, reflections on the metal trusses. But then I saw it myself. It was a quiet night, cold, clear, moonless. I was patrolling the county roads when dispatch radioed in. Unit 12, you're closest to Route 9. Caller reports a silhouette crossing the old bridge again. I sighed and turned on my lights, not the siren, just the steady flash, and headed toward the river. My dash cam clicked on automatically as I made the turn onto the narrow road leading to the bridge. The bridge came into view, a black skeleton against the cloudy sky. Frost shimmered on the metal like a thin layer of glass. Halfway across, something moved. I hit the brakes, tires crunching on frozen gravel. A long, dark shape slipped between the trusses. It didn't have the outline of a person, too tall, too thin. Its arms hung low, almost touching the walkway. Its head brushed the upper beams like it didn't belong in the space meant for humans. My first thought was someone playing a prank with a projector or a camera trick, but then it turned, slowly, toward my cruiser. And the shadow stretched, not toward the ground, toward me, across the bridge, across the road, across 50 feet of air, like it elongated just to watch me better. My heart hammered. I reached instinctively for my radio. Dispatch, I see it. There's something on the bridge. My voice cracked. I hated that it cracked. The shadow froze as if my voice startled it. Then it pulled back, twisting its shape like smoke being sucked into a vacuum. Its arms folded inward, its torso rippled, and then it straightened. At the far end of the bridge, exactly where it had first appeared. It hadn't walked there. It had simply snapped back into place. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I was imagining things. Maybe a passing truck's headlights behind me stretched the shadows. Maybe fatigue was messing with me. But then the figure, if you could call it that, took a step toward me. One step, that's all. But the entire bridge groaned with the weight. I panicked and threw the car into reverse, backing away faster than was safe. The cruiser skidded on ice, nearly hitting a guardrail. When I looked again, the bridge was empty. No shadow, no movement, just the cold river below. I stayed parked there for several minutes, trying to calm my breathing. When I reviewed the dashcam footage right then and there, my skin went cold. The camera froze at 2:13 a.m. exactly. The timestamp never moved until the moment I reversed the car. 14 full seconds of missing footage. I brought the cruiser back to the station and reported what I saw. The captain stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "It's an old bridge, son. Old metal casts shadows, fog plays tricks. The dashcam glitch? Low battery, it happens. The shape that moved? Maybe a homeless man, maybe a deer, maybe your eyes were tired." Nothing I said mattered. I sounded like the callers. Like the late-night weirdos everyone rolls their eyes at, but I knew what I saw, and it wasn't human. A week later, the calls increased. 5 sightings in 4 nights. Different callers, same description. A long shadow crossing the bridge, always at 2:13 a.m. I responded every time, and every time the dashcam froze for those exact seconds. Never more, never less. I started talking to the older officers. Most shrugged it off. But one, Officer Burnell, who'd been on the force for decades, pulled me aside one night. "You're not imagining it," he said quietly. "The bridge has history." "What kind of history?" He hesitated. "Bad history." He told me about a man from the 70s, someone who'd vanished one night while walking home across the bridge after his shift at a steel plant. No body was found, no sign of struggle, just an old lunch pail left in the center of the walkway. People whispered that he'd fallen into the river, but divers never found him. Then he mentioned something stranger. His brother died the same way a year later. "What do you mean?" "He went looking for him, never came back." 2 brothers, 2 disappearances, same bridge, no answers. Burnell lowered his voice further. My father worked the force back then, said some nights he'd see shadows on the bridge that didn't match anything around them. Long shadows, wrong shadows. I didn't want to believe it, but the fear in his eyes was real. And the weirdest part, he added, that old bridge was supposed to be demolished in 1987. Supposed to be? Funding fell through, but the demolition team said something strange. Said they heard footsteps on the catwalk above them, even though no one else was on site. Said something watched them from the beams. Why didn't they tear it down then? The foreman quit, right there on the spot. Whole crew walked off. They refused to go back. It sounded like a ghost story kids told around a fire, except this was a veteran cop, and he wasn't smiling. 2 nights later, everything escalated. We received another call at 2:12 a.m. The caller sounded panicked. It's crossing the bridge again. It's faster tonight. It's coming toward town. The line went dead. I sped toward the bridge. The moment I reached the road, a figure stood at the far end of the walkway. Not a shadow, a person. Or at least, it looked like one. Tall, thin, wearing old steel-toed boots, a worker's uniform from the 70s, hair plastered to its skull like it had been underwater for years, skin gray and sagging. But the worst part, its limbs weren't right. Too long, too flexible, like its joints were slowly sliding out of place. It took a step. The entire bridge screamed under its weight. I slammed the brakes so hard, the cruiser fishtailed. "Stop!" I shouted through the window. It didn't stop. It moved faster. The dash cam flickered, then froze again at 2:13 a.m. The figure reached the middle of the bridge, head twitching, mouth slightly open like it was whispering something. A second figure emerged beside it, then a third. They walked in perfect unison, slow, measured, like a procession, like they were reenacting something. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it over the engine. I tried to reverse, but the cruiser stalled. The lights flickered. The figures reached the far end of the bridge, the end closest to me. Then they stopped. They stared at me, all at once. Their heads tilted in perfect synchronization, too smoothly, like the motions were controlled by the same unseen force. Then one of them stepped off the bridge, onto the road, toward my car. I fumbled for the radio. "Unit 12 to dispatch. Send backup now. There are trespassers on the..." The radio cut to static. The figure took another step. I finally got the cruiser to start and threw it into reverse, speeding down the snowy road. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway. My hands shook uncontrollably. When backup arrived 30 minutes later, they found nothing. No figures, no footprints, no disturbed snow. The dashcam footage froze again, same timestamp. 2:13 a.m. 2 nights after that, the county finally approved the demolition. They brought in the crew at noon, in broad daylight, with full equipment. The moment the first demolition charge was set, the foreman came running back to his truck, pale, shaking, refusing to go back. He claimed someone was walking on the catwalk above him, even though the crew had sealed off every access point. He refused to continue. So did the rest of the workers. 3 days later, they sent another demolition crew. Same result. Someone, something, walked on the beams overhead, whispering, leaning over them, watching. Nobody would continue. The county gave up. They fenced the bridge off permanently. But the calls didn't stop. People still report seeing a long shadow walking the bridge at 2:13 a.m., crossing the same direction, pacing the same path, and somehow always facing the road, no matter where you stand. 2 weeks ago, on my night off, I drove near the river. I don't know why. Maybe I thought facing it again would help. Maybe I wanted proof it hadn't followed me. The moon was bright. The water was calm. The bridge was empty. Then at exactly 2:13 a.m., I saw it. A shadow stepping onto the walkway, then stretching, growing, reaching, not toward the bridge, toward me. I hit the gas so fast I nearly spun into the guardrail. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the shadow was gone. But the frost on my back window held a long smeared handprint, too long, too crooked, like something had leaned in close just before I escaped. And even now, some nights when the fog rolls off the river, I swear I hear footsteps behind me. Metal footsteps. Walking a pattern older than I am, walking toward me, crossing a bridge that should not exist. I bought the house on Mill Ridge Road because it felt like a good deal. Too good, if I'm honest. But at the time, I didn't care. I had just gotten divorced, I was tired of renting, and I wanted something quiet, something I could fix up, something that didn't remind me of the life I used to have. The realtor told me the house had been empty for a while, a few years actually. The previous owners had moved to Florida. They never came back for anything. Not the old tools in the garage, not the gardening supplies in the shed, not the paint cans in the basement. They told the realtor to sell it as is and mail them the check. It sounded strange, but I shrugged it off. People retire suddenly all the time. Maybe Florida sun felt better than Ohio winters. The house itself was fine. A single-story ranch with faded blue siding and a wraparound porch, a big backyard, a small line of trees, a basement that smelled like old dirt and mildew, nothing I hadn't seen before. But there was one thing I noticed the very first night. The basement door didn't like being closed. I didn't think much of it at first. Old houses settle, air pressure changes, doors shift. So when I heard the door crack open around midnight, just a slow creak, I assumed the latch was loose. I got up, nudged it shut, and went back to bed. In the morning, it was open again. Not fully, just a few inches, enough to see the darkness yawning down the stairs. I figured I hadn't shut it all the way. But the same thing happened the next night, and the next. I tried everything. I adjusted the hinge screws, replaced the latch, even wedged a folded piece of cardboard into the frame to keep it tight. Every morning, without fail, the door was cracked open by an inch, sometimes two. I told myself it was the house breathing, temperature changes, humidity, whatever. Then I heard the knocking. It was faint at first, 3 soft taps from the basement, light, almost hesitant. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. Coda, my golden retriever, lifted his head from the foot of the bed and growled low, a sound I had never heard from him. The taps came again. 3 knocks. No rhythm of pipes, no clanging, no random settling, clear, deliberate knocks. I turned on the lamp and walked toward the hallway, Coda sticking so close to my leg he nearly tripped me. I checked the basement door. It was open again, wider than before. 4 inches, maybe 5. Just far enough that I could hear cold air drifting up from below. I closed the door gently, locked it, stood there for a long minute with my hand on the knob. Nothing. No knocks, but when I walked back to my room, Coda wouldn't follow. He stayed planted in the hallway, staring at the basement like he expected something to crawl out at any moment. The next day, I bought a heavy deadbolt from the hardware store. Not one of those weak ones, but a thick steel model made for exterior doors. I installed it myself, drilled deep into the frame, anchored the screws until the door couldn't budge even when I leaned all my weight into it. Problem solved, I thought. That night, the knocking came again. Louder, harder. 3 knocks, then a pause, then 2 more, like someone trying different rhythms. Then scratching, fingernails dragging lightly across the door. Slow, deliberate, like they were tracing the outline of the wood. I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox and forced myself to approach the hallway. Coda refused to come. He whined, tail tucked, and backed away until he was practically pressed against the living room wall. The deadbolt was still locked, but the door itself was vibrating, a faint tremble, barely visible but definitely there. The scratching stopped the moment I touched the doorknob. Silence. My pulse thudded in my ears. The house felt colder, still, like it was waiting. I stayed up the rest of the night. At dawn, I finally slept for about an hour. When I woke up, the deadbolt was still locked, but the bottom of the door was pulled outward, warped slightly, like something had pushed hard against it from the inside. I don't scare easily. I'm a practical person. I like explanations, logic, normalcy. But that morning, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just the knocking. It was the feeling that the basement knew I was listening. I called a contractor that afternoon, told him I needed the basement inspected, wiring, foundation cracks, anything that might cause noises. He came by at 2. The moment he opened the basement door, he wrinkled his nose. Smells like something died down there. I hadn't noticed it before. Maybe adrenaline blocked it out. But when he mentioned it, I smelled it too. A faint, sweet rot hanging in the air. We went down the steps together. My flashlight beam cut across old furniture, shelves filled with paint cans, boxes left behind, and concrete walls lined with spider webs. The smell grew stronger the farther we went. The contractor checked the fuse box. Nothing wrong. He checked the pipes. No leaks, no rusted sections. He hit the walls with a mallet, listening for hollow spots. "This place is solid," he said. "No animals, no cracks, no draft strong enough to open a door. You sure the latch is working?" I showed him the deadbolt. He frowned. "Man, if this door is still opening, either someone's pranking you or this house has a serious air pressure issue." He didn't sound convinced of either. When we reached the deepest part of the basement, a corner where old wooden shelves sagged under the weight of unopened boxes, Coda started barking upstairs. Loud, violent. He never barked like that. The contractor froze. "You got someone else in the house?" "No." We looked at each other. Then the footsteps started. Upstairs. Someone walking slowly across the living room floor. Heavy steps, steady, purposeful. My blood went cold. We stayed still, listening. The footsteps stopped directly above us, right over our heads. The contractor whispered, "Call the police." I nodded and pulled out my phone. As soon as I dialed 911, the footsteps resumed, faster this time, moving from the living room toward the hallway, toward the basement door. Coda's barking turned frantic. Then there was a sound I will never forget. The basement doorknob rattled, hard, twisting left, right, trying to turn even though the deadbolt was locked. The contractor grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here." But there was no other exit. There were no windows, no back stairwell, only the door being twisted from above. I pressed myself against the concrete wall, phone trembling in my hand. The dispatcher answered just as something slammed against the door, a heavy, bone-jarring thud. I nearly dropped the phone. "Hello, sir? What's your emergency?" "We're locked in the basement. Someone's in the house. Someone's trying to get in. Units are on the way. Stay where you are." Another slam. Wood cracked. The contractor picked up a metal pipe and held it like a bat. "If that door breaks, run behind me." But the door didn't break. The footsteps suddenly stopped. Silence swallowed the house. We waited, listening, barely breathing. After what felt like hours but was probably 3 minutes, we heard pounding on the front door. "Sheriff's office!" The contractor exhaled shakily. We ran up the stairs and unlocked the basement door. It opened smoothly. No cracks, no visible damage. The house was empty. No intruder, no footprints, no broken windows, nothing. Except Coda, shaking under the dining table with his eyes fixed on the basement door. The deputies checked every closet, every room, the attic, the garage, even the crawl space. Nothing. One of them asked, "Are you sure the footsteps came from inside?" The contractor answered before I could. "They were in the house. Something was trying to get that door open. I heard it. I saw it." The deputy didn't argue, but he didn't know what to write down either. They stayed for an hour, then they left. The contractor refused to finish the inspection. I didn't blame him. I spent the rest of the day thinking about the footsteps, the weight, the timing, the rattling doorknob, but one thing bothered me more than anything. Coda had been barking at the basement door long before the footsteps started. He knew something was down there, or coming from there. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on and a hammer in my lap. Coda stayed curled against my leg, eyes locked on the hallway. Around 3:14 a.m., the house temperature dropped suddenly. A cold wave rippled across the floor. Coda's breath came out in fog. Then I heard the deadbolt click. I froze. The hallway was dark, but I could see the basement door handle turning, very slowly, even though it was still locked from the outside. It stopped. Then the knocking came again. 3 knocks, soft, patient, not frantic, not violent, more like testing, like whatever was behind that door wasn't trying to break it down anymore. It knew I was awake. It knew I was listening. Coda whimpered, pressing harder against my leg. The knocking repeated, louder this time, and the house seemed to sink under the weight of silence afterward. Then something spoke, not a word, a breath, a long, slow exhale seeping through the cracks around the door like cold mist. The basement smelled like dirt, and something else. Rotting grain. Old soil. Something buried. I wanted to move. I wanted to run, but my body locked. I sat there staring at the door, hammer in hand, shaking so hard I couldn't tell if I was gripping it or dropping it. Another breath, this one closer to the keyhole. The metal chilled instantly, frosting over. Coda growled, deep, rumbling, primal. The breath stopped. Then, quietly, so quietly I almost mistook it for settling wood, the deadbolt clicked again, unlocking, on its own. I bolted upright, ran to the door, slammed the bolt shut, and threw my entire weight against it. The thing on the other side did nothing. It didn't push, it didn't scratch, it didn't speak, it just waited. And I knew, I don't know how, but I knew it was waiting for me to speak first. I didn't. At dawn, the temperature rose, the house warmed. Coda finally stopped trembling and fell asleep next to me on the floor. When sunlight filled the hallway, I slowly opened the basement door. The basement looked normal, but the concrete floor was wet, not dripping, not puddles, just a faint sheen of moisture near the bottom of the steps, like something had been standing there all night. I didn't go to work, I didn't eat, I barely moved. At noon, I finally walked down the steps. At the bottom, in the center of the basement, something lay on the floor. A single footprint, long, narrow, too narrow for a human foot, and frozen like it had been pressed into a thin layer of ice. A trail of faint wet spots led toward the shelves, then ended. The contractor never came back. My neighbors avoid me like I've gone crazy. And every night, no matter what time I go to bed, no matter how loud the TV is, no matter how many locks I reinforce, the knocking comes. 3 taps, then that long cold breath, then the deadbolt clicks, softly, slowly, like fingers trying to remember how locks work. I haven't opened the basement door in 3 weeks. But every day, that warped section at the bottom of the frame grows just a little more. Something is pushing, something is patient, and whatever lives in that basement has already learned the sound of my footsteps, the rhythm of my breathing, the exact times I'm awake and when I'm not. Last night, just before dawn, I woke to a new sound, not knocking, not scratching, whistling. A long, tuneless whistle drifting up from the vents, matching my breath, echoing it. A perfect imitation. Something in that basement is practicing how to sound like me, and sooner or later, it won't need the door anymore. I didn't expect Woods Hollow Road to be the kind of place that sticks with a person. It looked ordinary enough when you drove it during the day. 2 miles of forest, a few scattered houses, an old horse pasture, and a narrow dead end that disappeared into thick brush. But people who lived around Lancaster knew the stories. 3 missing persons cases in 20 years. A hiker who vanished in broad daylight. A teenager whose bike was found abandoned near the creek. A hunter who walked into the woods and never walked back out. Locals said the road had a strange feeling, like something watched you as soon as you turned onto it. It didn't feel haunted, it felt aware. My family always avoided it. But when my friend Stephen insisted we take a shortcut through there one evening, I didn't think much of it. People exaggerated things all the time. It was early October, cool and windy, with the sky turning a dull gray like rain was coming. We had been hiking at Rising Park and decided to head home before the weather got worse. Stephen drove, and I sat in the passenger seat fiddling with the radio. When the Woods Hollow Road sign came into view, something inside me tensed. "You really want to go this way?" I asked. "It's faster," he said. "Don't let the stories get to you." I didn't answer. There was nothing scary about the road at first, just trees bending over the pavement, dropping leaves in thick piles. But the longer we drove, the quieter it got. No birds, no bugs, not even the rumble of distant cars. The entire road was silent except for the sound of our tires on broken asphalt. We reached the stretch where the forest grew thicker on both sides, and Stephen leaned forward, squinting. "Do you see that?" he whispered. At first, I didn't know what he meant. Then the headlights hit a wide clearing on the right, and I saw the remnants of a rundown cabin. Roof half collapsed, windows boarded, porch caved in. That didn't bother me. Old cabins sit abandoned in the woods everywhere. What bothered me was the figure standing near the tree line. A man, or something shaped like a man. He was still, so still, he might have been carved from wood. His clothes looked old, dirty, like they belonged to a different decade. His head was turned slightly, but not enough to see a face. Stephen slowed to a crawl. "Should we stop?" "No, just keep going," I muttered. I didn't want the man near us. Something about his posture felt unnatural. His arms hung too low, and his spine looked crooked, bent in a way that made my stomach twist. Stephen accelerated again, but the moment we passed the clearing, something thudded against the side of the car. We jerked in our seats. "Did we hit something?" Stephen shouted. "I don't think so, just keep driving." He didn't argue. The road curved sharply left, and the cabin and the figure vanished behind the trees. I tried to calm my breathing, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Another thud, this time on my side of the car. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Stephen gripped the wheel tighter. "Probably branches, they're close to the road." But I didn't see any branches close enough to hit us. A quarter-mile ahead, we reached the long, straight stretch before the dead end. The forest here was darker, thick pine trees blocking out the sky. The road narrowed, then something moved between the trunks. A shadow. Tall. Quick. I grabbed Stephen's arm. "There's something in the woods." He hit the high beams. For a split second, something pale flashed between two trees. A shape that looked vaguely human but wrong in the proportions. Its arms were too long, its shoulders hunched unnaturally, and the head was angled in a way that made me think of a broken doll. Stephen swore under his breath. "We're turning around. Screw this shortcut." He pulled into a narrow gravel pull-off and made a shaky three-point turn. Leaves crunched under the tires. The moment we faced back the way we came, we saw it. The figure from the clearing was now standing in the middle of the road, not moving, not breathing, just standing there, facing us. The high beams washed over him, revealing more details than before. His clothes weren't just old, they were filthy, torn. His chest was too thin. His eyes, if they were eyes, looked sunken and dark. His jaw hung slightly open. Stephen whispered, "He wasn't there a second ago." "No," I replied. "He wasn't." He put the car in reverse. "We're going the other way." But as soon as we backed, headlights caught a second figure stepping onto the road behind us. Then a third walked out from the trees. They weren't walking like normal people. Their movements were stiff, as if they hadn't used their limbs in a long time. Stephen pressed the gas, but the tires spun uselessly on the wet gravel. Panic set in instantly. The figures moved closer, not fast, just steady, slow steps like they knew there was nowhere for us to go. "Drive!" I shouted. "I'm trying!" The car jerked, caught traction, and shot backward. Stephen swung it into the trees on the right, forcing the car off the road. Branches scraped the sides, leaves slapped the windshield. But he didn't stop until we were 50 feet into the undergrowth. The engine sputtered, the headlights flickered, then the forest went silent. No movement outside, no figures, just crushing, suffocating quiet. We sat frozen in our seats, breathing hard, listening for anything. After a minute, Stephen whispered, "We need to get off this road." "We're stuck in the trees," I said. "Just stay quiet." I rolled down my window slightly, trying to listen beyond the pounding in my ears. That's when we heard it. A voice. Very close. "Help." Stephen stiffened. "Who said that?" The voice came again, another whisper drifting through the trees, soft and desperate. "Please help me." It didn't sound right. It wasn't coming from one direction. It floated from several places at once, like there were whispers circling us. Something brushed the side of the car. My entire body froze. Leaves crackled softly. Then a hand pressed lightly against the back window. I didn't see it clearly, just the outline, thin fingers dragging downward. Stephen didn't breathe. Neither did I. "Put the car in drive," I whispered, barely audible. He nodded but didn't move. His eyes were locked on something ahead of the car. I turned slowly. In the glow of our dying headlights, I saw a shape standing between two pines. The same proportions, the same stillness. But this one was leaning forward slightly, head tilting like it was studying us. There was no face, not really, just smooth, pale skin stretched over a long skull with sunken dents where eyes should be. Stephen whispered, "Dear God." The thing stepped forward, one slow, dragging foot in front of the other. It didn't blink. It didn't tilt its head again. It just stared, if staring was even something it could do without eyes. Then it opened its mouth. A dry, brittle sound came out, like air passing through a hollow space. "Help me." It wasn't speaking. It was copying. It was mimicking the voice we'd heard earlier. Something tapped the trunk. Something brushed my door. Something scraped the roof. Stephen finally snapped out of it, slammed the car into drive, and floored it. The car lurched forward, crashing through small saplings. Branches snapped under the tires. The engine roared, fighting the uneven terrain. Behind us, something large thrashed against the trees. Branches cracked loudly. Something began moving too fast to be human. I didn't dare look. We burst through the tree line, onto the main road again. The figures were gone. The stretch of pavement was empty. Stephen didn't slow down until we reached the highway. We drove in silence all the way back to town. When we finally stopped at a gas station under bright fluorescent lights, Stephen began to cry. Not loud, but shaking, uncontrollable breaths. I felt sick. My hands were trembling so badly I couldn't even hold my phone. We didn't tell anyone. Who would believe us? 2 days later, Stephen texted me at 3 a.m. I hear something outside my window. I called him immediately. He didn't answer. He didn't respond that morning or that afternoon. When I finally drove to his house, his car was still there. His bedroom window was open. The grass beneath it was wet and trampled. But there were no footprints, only a faint drag mark in the dirt, leading toward the tree line. His parents called the police. They searched the woods. They dragged the creek. They found nothing. People told me Stephen probably ran away, but I know better. Because sometimes late at night, I hear whispers at the edge of my yard. Not words, just that brittle, hollow attempt at speech. Always soft, always one pitch off from human. And every morning, I find fresh drag marks in the grass, leading from the woods, stopping just short of my window. I bought the farmhouse in Defiance because it felt like a place where life could quiet down again. After losing my dad, I needed space from the noise of the city and the constant reminders of what I no longer had. The house sat a few miles outside town, tucked behind a long gravel driveway and surrounded by fields that had been empty for years. It wasn't perfect, peeling paint, old wiring, a roof that needed attention, but it felt honest, solid, a place where I could breathe again. The realtor mentioned the basement door sticking sometimes, saying it just needed a little sanding or a new hinge. That didn't bother me. Old houses have quirks, but she didn't mention that the door had a habit of opening on its own. The first night I slept there, I chalked it up to settling wood. I woke around 2 in the morning to a dull creak echoing through the hallway. When I rolled over and looked out my bedroom door, I saw the basement door standing slightly ajar. I was half asleep and told myself I must have forgotten to shut it. When I closed it again, the latch didn't fully catch, so I pulled it harder until it clicked. The next morning it was open again. Not wide, just a few inches. Enough that the cool, earthy smell from below had drifted upstairs. I shrugged it off, assuming the latch simply wasn't holding. I tightened the screws, tested the frame, and the door held firm. That night, it opened again, this time around midnight. The creak was slow, like the wood was resisting the movement. When I walked into the hallway, the door was open wider than before. I closed it and sat awake for an hour, listening for any shift in the house, any draft that could have caused it. Nothing. By the third night, when I heard the now familiar drawn-out creak, a knot formed in my stomach. I got up, turned on the hallway light, and found the door open halfway down the frame. The house was still. The air was cold. There was no breeze. I slammed it shut and jammed a chair under the doorknob. It still opened. The chair tipped and leaned forward, the doorknob pulling it just enough that the door cracked open an inch. I stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of how that could happen, but no explanation made sense. The next morning, I bought a heavy sliding bolt and installed it at the top of the door. Metal on metal, firm, unbreakable. The bolt slid perfectly into place. That night, the creak returned, slow, testing. Then a faint vibration shook the door, just barely enough to rattle the bolt. I stared at the ceiling, heart thudding, trying not to think about it. Eventually, I fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion. When I woke in the morning, the bolt was still locked, but the bottom corner of the door was pulled outward, wood splintered where it met the frame, as if something had pulled on it. Hard. 2 nights later, things got worse. I was in the kitchen cooking dinner when I heard a soft thump from the hallway. A moment later, Coda, my dad's old dog, began growling toward the basement door. His fur stood straight, tail stiff, hackles raised. He'd never growled like that in his life. I turned toward the hallway slowly, dread tightening every muscle in my body. The doorknob was turning, not violently, not rattling, just a slow, deliberate movement, like someone testing it from the other side. I froze. Coda let out a deep bark and rushed forward, but he stopped short of the threshold and refused to get closer. "Hello?" I called, though the moment I said it, I regretted it. My voice sounded thin, shaking. The doorknob stopped turning. Silence filled the hallway. I waited, barely breathing, straining my ears for any hint of sound. After several seconds, I forced myself to step forward and grab the knob. It was warm, which didn't make sense. Everything in that part of the house stayed cold. I turned it sharply. The door slammed itself shut the rest of the way, the bolt clacking loudly as it hit the frame. The vibration traveled through the floorboards and up my legs. Coda whimpered and backed away. I stood there, staring at the door, my hand still on the knob, waiting for the next move. Nothing came. The next morning, I called a contractor, told him I needed the basement inspected, foundation, ventilation, the whole thing. He came the following afternoon. The moment he opened the door, a strong smell drifted out. It wasn't rot exactly, but something damp and metallic, like wet concrete mixed with old soil. He wrinkled his nose and turned on his flashlight. I followed him downstairs, though Coda refused to budge from the top step. The basement was cold, colder than the rest of the house by at least 10 degrees. The concrete walls were damp. Puddles formed near the back corner where the floor dipped slightly. "There's moisture here," he said. "Could be a pipe, could be the foundation." "Could that be causing the door to open?" I asked. He hesitated. "Not really. A draft, maybe, but even that seems unlikely with how tight the frame is. You sure it's not settling wood?" I nodded. "I installed a bolt. It still forces itself." He didn't answer. He just shook his head and kept examining the room. He tapped on the walls with a rubber mallet, listened, inspected the beams. Nothing was out of place, except for the far corner. He walked toward it slowly, flashlight beam bouncing across the concrete. The smell grew stronger. The shadows looked deeper. Something about that corner felt wrong, not visibly, but in a way that made my skin tighten. "Is this where the water pools?" he asked. "Usually." He crouched and shined the flashlight along the floor. "This isn't a leak, it's condensation. Something is drawing moisture here." "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. He just stood up, walked past me and said, "I can't help you with this." "What do you mean?" "This basement, I don't know what's going on, but it's not something I can fix." He shook his head again. "I'm sorry, you should get someone else to look at it." He left quickly, refusing to take payment. That night, I lay in bed listening for any sound. The house was quiet for hours, too quiet. Even the wind outside felt muted. Around 3 in the morning, the doorknob turned again. This time, I heard breathing on the other side of the door. Not heavy, not fast, just slow, steady breaths like someone standing close to the wood, waiting. Coda barked from inside my bedroom, hackles raised. "Go away!" I whispered, though my voice barely left my throat. The breathing stopped. Then a soft, scraping sound slid across the door. Fingernails, lightly tapping, slowly dragging. I forced myself to walk into the hallway, each step shaking the floor under my feet. When I reached the basement door, the bolt was vibrating, not violently, just enough that I could see the metal shifting. I pressed my ear against the wood. A whisper came through. Not a word, just the shape of one, a faint exhale pressing through the cracks around the frame. My blood turned cold. I backed away and returned to my room, keeping Coda close until the sun rose. But the daylight didn't fix anything. The next morning, muddy footprints appeared at the bottom of the basement stairs. Long strides, narrow, not human. They led from the far corner to the base of the steps, then stopped. No return tracks, no signs of entry. That night, the bolt unlocked itself. I heard the metallic click from my bed. Coda bolted upright, barking furiously, and I ran into the hallway just in time to see the basement door swinging slowly open. No wind, no shaking, just a steady motion like someone pulling it from below. I slammed it shut and locked it again. Then I pushed a heavy dresser in front of it. At 3 in the morning, the dresser moved. I woke to the sound of wood scraping against the floor. I ran to the hallway and saw the dresser tilted forward, sliding inch by inch as if being nudged. The deadbolt clicked again. My stomach dropped. The door vibrated. Then I heard something else. Footsteps, soft, slow, damp, approaching the top of the stairs. I could hear the weight shift on each step, water settling with each movement. I backed into the living room, gripping the fireplace poker so tightly my hand ached. The steps reached the door, then silence. The doorknob turned with a slow, deliberate motion. I held my breath. The door pushed forward an inch, 2 inches. I shoved my weight into the dresser and forced it back into place. The door stopped. The pressure on the other side faded, but not completely. I remained there until sunrise. When I finally opened the door to check the basement that day, the air was colder than anywhere I'd ever been. Frost clung to the steps, condensation coated the walls, and in the far corner, the wet puddle had expanded into a long, thin shape, like the outline of someone lying there. I don't sleep at night anymore. I listen. I wait. The knocking always comes and the bolt always shifts. Sometimes the footsteps move all the way to the door. Sometimes they retreat. Sometimes I hear breathing through the vents, soft and deliberate, as if it's learning the sound of my patterns. 3 days ago, I found something new. Handprints on the inside of the basement door. Not mine. Not anyone's I know. Long fingers, wet palms, thin impressions where the heel of a hand had pressed against the wood. Even worse, there were more of them the next morning, and more the day after that. Last night, as I lay in bed trying to convince myself I hadn't made a mistake buying this house, I heard something move through the living room. Slow steps, dragging sounds, water dripping onto the hardwood floor. Something had gotten out. The footprints leading from the basement door were faint, but they tracked across the living room, down the hallway, stopping just outside my bedroom. I don't know what waits in that basement. I don't know why it chose me, or why it's getting braver every night. But I know one thing without any doubt. It isn't trying to get out anymore. It's already in the house, and it's waiting for the right moment to come all the way down the hallway. Moonville Tunnel was always just a cool local landmark to me, a creepy place to take pictures, an abandoned piece of railroad tucked deep into the Zaleski State Forest that teenagers used to explore on weekends. I'd been there half a dozen times growing up, walked through it, shouted into the echoing darkness, even camped near it on a dare once. Nothing ever happened. Nothing ever felt threatening. But something changed last winter, and whatever lives in that tunnel now is nothing like the stories people grew up with. I didn't go looking for trouble. I didn't go hunting ghosts or chasing legends. I went because my brother Jonah needed a distraction. He'd just gotten laid off from work. His girlfriend left him, and he'd been sinking deeper into a depression that scared me. I thought getting him out of the house might help, even if it was just to breathe the cold air and walk a bit. "Let's hit the tunnel," I told him. "We'll walk some trails. Clear your head." He shrugged and went along with it. The woods were dead silent that day. It wasn't snowing, but the sky was gray enough to feel like twilight. The trees looked brittle. The air was bitter and sharp, the kind that stings your lungs a little every time you inhale. We parked a quarter mile from the trailhead and walked along the muddy path until the tunnel came into view. Moonville Tunnel is huge, taller and wider than most railroad tunnels, with graffiti covering every inch of the stone. The entrance looks like the mouth of some ancient creature, too dark inside to see anything past a few feet. As soon as we approached, Jonah stopped walking. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I listened, expecting to hear wind or dripping water, but what I heard instead was breathing. Not heavy, not raspy, just soft, steady breaths echoing faintly from inside the tunnel. I told myself it was probably just air moving through, or someone else inside. Sound travels strangely in there, bouncing in weird ways. Still, something about the rhythm of it felt too controlled, too close. "Probably some hikers ahead of us," I said, but Jonah didn't look convinced. Sounds wrong. We stepped closer. The air inside the tunnel was colder than outside, a deep, unnatural cold that seeped into my clothes instantly. The stone walls were slick with moisture, glistening in the dim light. Our footsteps echoed long after we stopped moving. Halfway in, the breathing grew louder. Jonah grabbed my arm. "Someone's ahead. Look." I lifted my flashlight. A figure stood dead center in the tunnel, maybe 60 feet away. Not moving, not turning, just standing perfectly still with its back to us. The beam hit the shape of a thin man, shoulders hunched slightly, head tilted forward. He wore something torn and dark. I lowered my voice. "Excuse me? You okay?" The figure didn't react. Jonah whispered, "Why is he standing there like that?" "I don't know." We stepped forward slowly. The sound of our footsteps echoed unnaturally, stretching too long, as if the tunnel were swallowing and releasing sound on its own terms. When we were about 40 feet away, the figure finally moved, but not in any normal way. Instead of turning around, it shifted backward, not stepping, sliding, like it was being pulled away without moving its legs. It kept the same distance no matter how far we walked. Jonah froze. "We need to go." "Hang on," I whispered, though I didn't know why. Curiosity? Fear? Something between them? The figure slid farther back into the tunnel, always maintaining the same distance. We walked for another 30 feet until we were nearly at the center, where the overhead air always drips from condensation and the light from the entrance fades completely. The figure didn't speak, didn't turn, just drifted backwards silently until it disappeared into the pitch black. Something inside me finally snapped. "We're done," I said. "We're turning around." Jonah didn't argue. He looked pale, hands shaking slightly. But as soon as we turned to walk back toward the tunnel entrance, another figure stood there. A second one, identical shape, same stance, same distance. My chest tightened. We stopped walking. The figure ahead of us didn't move, but the breathing returned, louder now, echoing from both directions, surrounding us. "Okay," Jonah whispered, voice cracking. "What's happening?" "I don't know," I said. "But we can't stand still." We started moving again, slowly, one step at a time. Each time we moved, the figures at both ends adjusted their positions, sliding backward the exact same amount we walked forward, always keeping the same distance, like they were mirrors, like they were keeping us trapped in the center. Jonah grabbed my sleeve. "Don't walk any farther." "Why?" He pointed at the floor. Water pooled there, but the puddle wasn't still. Tiny ripples were forming. Soft, concentric circles like something beneath the water was rising toward the surface. The ripples spread outward across the floor, not randomly, in patterns, deliberate ones, moving in a slow spiral toward us. Jonah whispered, "We need to leave, now." We turned again and both figures began sliding closer, not running, not lunging, not stepping, just gliding silently like shadows freed from gravity. I could feel panic climbing up my spine. Every instinct screamed that the tunnel wasn't letting us go. We backed away, keeping our eyes on the figures, and one of them tilted its head slightly. The motion was stiff and unnatural, like it had forgotten how necks work. The breathing grew louder, deeper, closer. Jonah whispered, "Run." We sprinted toward the entrance. The air turned ice cold, colder than anything I'd felt before. My lungs burned. Jonah's footsteps echoed beside mine, the sound warped and stretched by the tunnel walls. The figure behind us slid faster now, gliding more quickly than any human could run. It didn't make footstep sounds. It didn't pant. It didn't speak. It simply moved. I glanced back once. Just once. It was closer. Its shape was sharper, more detailed. Its arms were too long. Its torso was too thin. Its head hung to the side as if the neck couldn't fully support it. Dark patches covered its clothes. Not dirt. Not mold. Something darker. When we finally burst out of the tunnel into the gray daylight, I felt something shift behind me. A strong rush of cold air, like something lunging forward. But the moment we were clear of the stone arch, everything stopped. The air warmed slightly. The breathing vanished. The figure stood just inside the entrance, body rigid, head slowly lifting as if trying to follow us. But it didn't step beyond the boundary. It just watched. Silent. Broken. Jonah didn't wait. He ran down the trail, gripping his sides, gasping like someone fleeing a nightmare. I followed him, too scared to look back more than once. But I shouldn't have looked. Because when I glanced over my shoulder, the figure was still there. But now another shape stood beside it. A second figure. Identical. Unmoving. Watching. We didn't speak the entire drive home. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something standing in the road. That night, Jonah called me at 2:37 a.m. His voice shook like he was freezing. "Something's in my hallway," he whispered. "What do you mean? What do you see?" "A figure. Tall. Thin. It's standing at the end of the hall. I can't see its face." My blood went cold. "Are you sure it's not your shadow?" "It's not my shadow," he whispered. "It's moving." I grabbed my keys. "I'm coming." "No, don't hang up," Jonah whispered. It keeps tilting its head toward me, same way it did in the tunnel." I tried to calm him, but he kept whispering, voice breaking. "It's sliding. It doesn't walk. It slides toward me." I heard him back into a room, heard the door shut, heard his breath shaking violently. Then he whispered something I still hear in my nightmares. It brought the dark with it. My hallway isn't lit anymore. The lights went out when it got closer. "Stay put," I said. "I'm almost," he gasped sharply, then went silent. "Jonah? Jonah!" Nothing. When I arrived, his front door was wide open. The hallway lights were all off, even the ones I knew worked. The entire place felt unnaturally cold. I found Jonah in his bedroom, collapsed on the floor, unconscious but breathing. The room was freezing. Frost clung to the walls. His skin was icy to the touch. He never saw the figure again, but I did. 3 nights later, I woke to a faint echo in my house. Not breathing, not footsteps, a slow sliding sound, like something gliding across the floor. When I opened my eyes, a shadow stood at the end of my hallway, tall, thin, head tilted, watching me. It drifted backward into the darkness, keeping the same distance no matter how far I followed, until it slipped into the night and vanished. Now every time the house gets quiet, I hear soft echoes in the walls. Like the tunnel is still with me, like something followed me home. And when I close my eyes at night, I see a long, thin figure at the edge of the darkness, patiently gliding forward, waiting for the moment I don't look.